We survived the bipocalypse in week 13, but some NFL players didn't make it out intact. This might have been the worst injury week in the entire 2023 season. So let's go over the injury report and then talk about who are the top waiver wire pickups and replacements as you get ready for the fantasy playoffs. One of the top waiver wire pickups of this entire season and one of the best receivers in fantasy is now done right before you need him the most. Early in the game for Houston, Tank Dell fractured his fibula, was carted off, and he is out on IR already. This is a huge blow to that Texans offense, but especially to fantasy owners. We saw Nico Collins assert himself as the one. There's got to be somebody else to step up. I'll talk about that a little bit later, who I like in that Texans offense. And then another potential multi-week injury in a very different offense. That's the Patriots. Ramondre Stevenson early in the game, also with an ankle injury. Early word is that he might be out 2-3 weeks, maybe even longer. Also, terrible timing because there's so few workhorse running backs you depend on, and Ramondre was one of them, and he was just gaining steam and becoming a very dependable fantasy player, and now it looks like he might be out at the worst time possible. And then another one at the running back position, Brian Robinson, in that blowout loss to Miami. He was one of the few players that actually looked good, but didn't make it through the game. He left with a hamstring injury. Now, I guess the silver lining here is that even though he might be out 1, 2, maybe even 3 weeks, you know how it can be with a hammy, at least the Commanders are on bye next week, so you wouldn't be able to play him anyways. Not going to even get into speculation about Antonio Gibson or even Chris Rodriguez. Let's see how the bye week plays out and how B-Rob is at that point. And then we had a couple of head injuries leading to the concussion protocol. Derrick Henry also coming off another huge game. He left, and we saw a lot of Tyjae Spears. I think it goes without saying, if Henry misses, he's going to be one of your top pickups. And then Amari Cooper also left the game. He's been battling all sorts of injuries lately. Was questionable all week with a rib injury suffered last week. He played, but it didn't take long for him to exit again. We'll have to monitor his status here. Gotta wonder if he's going to make it through the season intact. Then Derek Carr took another brutal hit. So he left with concussion, shoulder, and back injuries. This is not the first time he's been in concussion protocol this season and had a shoulder issue. You've got to think just based on that alone, there's a good chance he actually misses next week. And that means we might be treated to the Jameis experience. Famous Jameis could be in line to start. Let's see how that goes. Also at quarterback, Kenny Pickett in what was already a disappointing game for the Steelers. They're going to lose their starting quarterback probably for a couple of weeks. Also, he suffered an ankle injury, which means Mitch Trubisky is back in the driver's seat. There's no way you should be considering Trubisky or should have been considering Pickett for fantasy, even in deep leagues. The big question here is, how does this affect the value of receivers Deontay Johnson, George Pickens, and tight end Pat Freiermuth? Also in that game, receiver Marquise Brown, Arizona, left. He missed practice all week and for the last couple of weeks has been limited with a heel injury. Played last week and did fine. Thought he was in line for a big game this week, but he didn't make it out. I guess it finally caught up to him. Cardinals are on bye, so he gets to rest at the perfect time. You're not going to have Hollywood next week, but don't go and rush to pick up Greg Dortch or anybody else because you would be able to use him anyways. And finally, Tyler Higbee, also left with a concussion. Didn't repeat his 2-touchdown game, didn't get the chance. There's no need to pivot to any sort of tight end here in this offense. It's going to be Puka and Cooper Kupp. It's time to run down all the top waiver wire pickups heading to week 14, and in this case, a lot of injury replacements. First, a reminder that if you sign up for Underdog, you get to take advantage of new customer special right now for Monday Night Football before week 13 is over. Trevor Lawrence just going higher than 0.5 total yards. You get a free pick basically if you sign up right now for Underdog. Use promo code ENDGAME, and you also get a 100% deposit match up to $100, and then you get this free pick combining with any other pick and get a good chance to win triple your money right off the bat. All right, let's get to that first injury. Tank Dell, again, that's a big one for fantasy teams right now. You're not going to go out and find Nico Collins on waivers, but you can still go out and get Noah Brown. Talked about him coming back from injury finally. He did play, whether you know it or not, in week 13. You wouldn't know it because he didn't catch a single pass. It was only targeted twice. You got to think that, he's just not all the way back yet. Maybe they want to push it with him and the knee injury. Brown has missed a lot of time this year, so I know this is kind of a risky take here. Missed 6 games already. But when he's been on the field, he has been really good. In fact, leading the NFL heading into this week with almost 21 yards per reception. The veteran Robert Woods is still there. He didn't even get targeted, so it's clear he is not an option. Look, Noah Brown is a guy who has tremendous upside. There's no better pickup right now at the wide receiver position than Brown. Available in more than half of fantasy leagues, so this is the time to go and scoop him up. And looking at next week, you see the Texans get the Jets. Terrible matchup against a great defense. But what have we seen? The Jets with Sauce Gardner at cornerback, they tend to shut down or at least limit the production of number one receivers on the other end. But they can give up some games to number two wide receivers. Just look at Jalen Waddle a couple of weeks ago. So while all the focus is going to be on Nico after his huge game, it might actually be Noah Brown who benefits the most. And now I want to shift your attention to the Texans' backfield because you may not even notice there's a change here. Just like that, we got a new RB1. It was really easy to write off Dameon Pierce because, well, before he even got hurt and missed multiple games, he had just been bad. Less than 3 yards per carry, hadn't done anything of significance for fantasy this entire season. And then Devin Singletary came in and looked really good for a couple of weeks. But this week, D'Amico Ryans basically said, thank you for your service, but you can be the number two guy now because Dameon Pierce was clearly the lead back. Pierce carried the ball 15 times for 41 yards with a touchdown, whereas Singletary only carried it 8 times for 36 yards. While this still figures to be sort of a timeshare going forward, if Pierce is going to be doubling the number of touches, Singletary, he's going to be one that's fantasy relevant. Like he was a starter heading into the season. He should be the guy there. He definitely looked better this week. I'll give you that. I'm not ready to pronounce Pierce the guy you want to start in fantasy, but definitely worth picking back up if he was dropped. And there's another lead running back who had been dropped in some leagues because he's on basically the worst team in the NFL, although that's debatable. But the Carolina Panthers have the worst record in the league. But Chuba Hubbard is looking like he is just the guy in that backfield now. And he definitely looked like the guy this week. 25 carries, 104 yards on the ground, and 2 touchdowns against a pretty good Bucs run defense. Meanwhile, Miles Sanders, who got that big contract in the offseason, only 8 carries. Chuba has taken a firm grip on this lead RB role, and while Sanders will still get a few touches, it looks like he's just kind of a change of pace guy. Seems like he's pretty much done being a fantasy asset. But not just that, the Chuba is actually looking really good, and he's getting in the end zone. This Panthers offense doesn't score a lot, but when they do, and they get near the red zone, they're definitely giving the ball to Chuba and not risking it through the air. This is also significant this week, especially because you remember, head coach Frank Reich is gone. We have a new head coach, new play caller, and so what do they want to do? They're going to obviously give it to some of the younger guys here. Chuba not being that much younger than Miles Sanders, but still, he's clearly going to be the guy that they're going to favor. And while it's hard-pressed to imagine there might be 2 Carolina Panthers worth talking about on the waiver wire, I'm going to lead into Jonathan Mingo now for the same reason. In the first game of the post-Reich era, we saw a new lead target in the receiver room, and that was the rookie Mingo. He had 10 targets and caught a team-high 6 passes for 69 yards. Meanwhile, Adam Thielen, remember him? Remember top 10 fantasy receiver Adam Thielen from the first half of the season? He only caught 3 passes for 25 yards, 6 targets. This actually makes sense. 33-year-old Adam Thielen getting a ton of targets, being the lead receiver here, it did not make sense early in the season. It's like that's all I had going. That was the entire game plan. Maybe that's part of the reason Reich isn't around anymore. It just makes sense for this young, losing team that is not only already eliminated from playoff contention, but needing to build for the future with their young rookie quarterback. You might as well develop the talent you have. With a guy like Mingo, who you drafted early, what is Thielen even doing there other than being a mentor? So while we have to admit, not a lot of touchdown upside here because they just don't score a lot. And like I said, when they get in the red zone, they're going to try to run the ball. But still, Mingo, if he's going to be the lead target for the rest of the season, I mean, you got to prefer him to Thielen. You know, in Cleveland, we had a change at quarterback. Again, it's the veteran, very veteran, Joe Flacco. It looks pretty good. I mean, we had to wait and see. We had no idea, a guy who hadn't played the entire season on a new team for the first time, how he would look. He kind of looked like Joe Flacco has looked in his prime. And I say that because Joe Flacco was never really a fantasy stud or an elite quarterback other than that one year and in that one postseason especially. Flacco was good. He was efficient. Didn't get the win, but who cares? It's fantasy. What did he do when he was out there? He threw the ball mainly to a guy he knows from the New York Jets, and that's Elijah Moore. Moore led the team on 83 yards and 4 catches. With the rookie Dorian Thompson-Robinson, we saw him just pepper David Njoku, the tight end, with targets. Well, Flacco didn't really have the chance to throw to Amari Cooper because, as I mentioned, he left early with injury. Who knows what his status is going forward. But he didn't really throw tight end. He threw it to Moore first and foremost. Moore only had 4 catches, but he had 12 targets. The next closest receivers, David Njoku and Cedric Tillman, each had 6, half as much. I think whether Amari plays or doesn't play next week, I have a feeling Elijah Moore is now the number 1 receiver in this offense. In the first 3 games of last season, when Flacco was the starting quarterback for the New York Jets, and Elijah Moore was his number 1 receiver, he targeted him 21 times in those 3 games. So we have sort of another changing the guard here, just like I said with Carolina. Adam Thielen had been the guy. Now we have to look more at Mingo. Amari Cooper has clearly been the number 1 receiver in Cleveland. I think down the stretch, it is Moore. With Derrick Henry leaving game in week 13 with a head injury, we did see another shift here, and we might see at least for a 1 week only, with Tyjae Spears as the lead running back. So Spears came in and did what he's done all season and preseason when he's given the chance for extended run. Looked really good. 16 carries, 75 yards, and he also caught 4 passes. This is far from an explosive offense, as we know, but Spears looks like an explosive player, and he's going to get the volume, which means you've got to be interested here, whether you have Henry or not. If you have Derrick Henry, you should have already had Tyjae Spears. Let's just face it. We've been talking about this for weeks now. Playoff prep, you want to have the number 1 backup to your stud running back. You have Henry, you didn't have Spears, you have to get him now for sure, because Henry might not even play in week 14, and you want to have him anyways. And even if you don't have Henry, you should still be interested in a guy who's going to be a workhorse back at least for 1 week. Tennessee gets Miami on the road next week. Not ideal because they might be playing from behind, and they're just not a good road team. But the good thing with Spears, and the one way that he's better objectively than Derrick Henry, is as a receiver. So even if you feel he won't do much on the ground or get much opportunity on the ground, he could catch several passes. And if I'm going to make a case for getting a number 1 running back because of volume, which is so important, I have to talk about Zeke. It's sounding like Ramondre Stevenson is going to be out multiple weeks. Who knows if he comes back this season, at least for this fantasy season. So now we got Ezekiel Elliott, New England Patriot, as a workhorse once again. And he really will be used that way because after Mondre and Zeke, the next leading rusher on this Patriots team was Mac Jones. And then after that, Demario Douglas. There's really nobody else who even qualifies as a running back, unless Ty Montgomery does count as a running back these days, other than a wide receiver, who's gotten any carries. And Montgomery's gotten all of 2 this season. I know, I don't want anything to do with this Patriots offense any more than you or anybody else does. But we're talking about a running back who could get 15 to 20, maybe even more opportunities. It's fantasy. That's valuable. And for a team who has absolutely no passing game, they're going to feed him. They're going to throw him the ball. That makes him a fantasy asset. He wasn't too bad in week 13 either. Went 17 carries for 52 yards on the ground and caught 4 balls for 40 yards. It's been a while since Zeke was a fantasy stud. You remember way back when he was a top 3 fantasy running back his rookie year and then his 3rd year. It was only a few years ago, but in running back years, that feels like 50. But even if it's not vintage Zeke, it's going to be workhorse Zeke. And so you need a running back, especially if you just lost Ramondre. Go ahead and make a claim for Elliott. Now that you've started your week 14 prep with Waiver Wire, continue with our start sit advice at every position we got it here on this playlist. Check it out.